Hey everybody, it's Sheriff, and we are back with another GLC set review looking at Chaos Rising today. We will look at all relevant cards in the set coming out and rank them 1 to 5. And at the very end, we will take a look at my ranking, a tier list ranking of all of the types currently. Here is my kind of my thought process behind ranking things if you are interested in that. Without further ado, let's get started with the first card, which is Carnivine, which is a basic with the Chomp Down attack for 3 colorless energy. It does 80 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon has no retreat cost, this does 80 more. So 160 for 3 only if they have a free retreat cost, which usually the ones with free retreat cost are going to be support Pokemon, as they are usually pivots with tools attached. But at that point you are close to KOing a lot of them anyway, or they should be quite easy to take out. So I think this guy is kind of redundant and doesn't really have a place. It's not the worst attack, but it is definitely too conditional. So there we go. Moving on to Chestnut, however, we have a stage 2 with 180 HP, so he's a beefy boy. Has the Needle Armor ability. If this Pokemon is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, even if it's knocked out, you place 3 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon for each grass energy attached to this Pokemon, and then has a serviceable attack that does 160 for 3, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon cannot retreat. So we're here for the ability, which we can take advantage of with Meganium. So if Chestnut has just 3 energy attached to it, with the Meganium, it is dealing 180 damage just from its ability, and you can have Chestnut tank a hit with something like a Pot Helmet, or a Luxurious Cape, or if you want to get crazy, you can even go with the Bursting Balloon, and you are probably one-hit KOing a lot of things with its attack, and then you're especially KOing stuff with its ability, and so this guy could potentially go 4 for 1, and I think is really strong. He is a stage 2, so, and grass space is already very tight in things like Rillaboom, but I think he's very good, and gonna be good going forward. Sorry. Moving on to fire, we have this new Ho-Oh, which has a kind of a lore accurate attack with Flames of Resurrection. For a fire, you can put up to 3 basic Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench, which I guess we can get Pokemon into the discard early on with things like Battle Compressor, but I don't think this is a viable strategy at all. And then it has a serviceable attack that does 130 for 3, and you discard a fire attached to this Pokemon, which is not great. It's fine, but really underwhelming. If Flames of Resurrection said put up to 3 fire Pokemon from your discard, I think this would be significantly better. That would be super cool, and would be something fire could definitely utilize, because all their good Pokemon are stage 2s. However, we get this very mid Ho-Oh. Moving on, I did want to point out this Fennekin, which is probably the most optimal Fennekin if you're playing a Delphox line, as it has 70 HP, has 1 retreat, and has Call for Family, which is a great attack on an evolving Pokemon. Attached to that Fennekin, we have this new Delphox, which is stage 2, 160 HP, has the Flare Magic ability. Once during your turn, you may discard a basic fire from your hand, and you draw until you have 7 in your hand. And we can compare this to the old Delphox, which has the ability where you get to just fill your hand to 6 with no requirement. And there are pros and cons to both. I still think that running the old Delphox is better because off of a hand disruption to like 1 or 2 cards, Flare Magic is doing nothing, while the Mystical Fire Delphox is getting you back into the game. So there is that. However, the new Delphox has a very good attack where it is Energy Storm. For 2 fire, it does 30 damage, times the amount of energy attached to all Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's. So this can get very, very high. If you're playing this with Charizard, then it gets even bigger, but we all know the state of fire right now. It still is a good support Pokemon, and yeah, I see an argument for running this or the other Delphox, but I don't know if this is going to save fire currently. Moving on, we have a new Octillery that has the Corner Stop attack, which does 30 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, when the defending Pokemon tries to attack, they flip 2 coins. If either is tails, that attack does nothing. So most of the time, you are stopping your opponent from attacking. You're only doing 30 damage, but you could boost this with things like the Rapid Strike Inteleon, or the Starmie that places damage counters, and then you can also, maybe spread some damage early on, but you don't really want to be knocking stuff out. This is more of a stall ability or attack, and I just think there are better things you could be doing, especially playing the Abyssal Hand Octillery. We then have this Delibird, which I find is just a hilarious card to point out. With the Happy Present attack for a colorless, both players may attach up to 3 energy from their hand to their Pokemon in any way they like, which is just a hilarious attack. But you could kind of plan around this attack and spring it on your opponent. They might not have energy in their hand, but if they do, you were just very much helping them out. But it's a funny attack. It would be fun to mess around with. We have this Avalugg, which is stage 1, 160 HP, and has an attack for a water energy, and you discard the top 6 cards of your deck. This attack does 60 damage for each basic water energy discarded in this way. And there is someone who plays at Full Grip Games, Tricky Jim's home store, who has played a deck like this where they play like a ton of energy, like 20 energy, and you try and just like dump a bunch of energy into your discard, doing huge damage, and then you just shuffle it back in with things like Hisuian Basculegion, and then you can finish the game off with like the Kyogre from Celebrations to do a bunch of damage to 2 Pokemon. So I think it fits in that deck. It's kind of a funny deck, but it's really cool, and especially with the new item that we will get to, I think it's very welcome in this deck. So Yeah, he's a silly guy. Could be pretty good in this style of deck. Then we have this Golisopod, which has the critical cut attack for 30 damage for 1 water energy. If this attack's damage knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon can't be affected by damage or effects of attacks. So if this sounds familiar, it is just like the attack on the Marshadow. This is only for 1 energy. Marshadow attacks for 2 energy, but that attack does 60 damage while this does 30, which is a lot harder to loop, but you could boost that with things like the Inteleon, like I said earlier, and the Starmie, which places damage. You can play Muscle Band, stuff like that. Or you can play some spread cards like the Frostmoth, which does 20 damage to each Pokemon, opponent's Pokemon. So you could like spread a bunch of damage and soften everything up, and then go in with the Golisopod and try and sweep the game. Could be interesting. Probably not the best strategy, but he is a fun little guy. Moving on to Lightning, we have a new Ampharos. Shout out to Forest for this guy. Has the ability Synchronized Pulse. If you and your opponent have the same number of cards in your hand, this Pokemon's attacks do 80 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And has the attack Flash Bolt, which does 140 for 2, and then next turn this Pokemon can't use Flash Bolt. So with the ability, this attack is doing 220 damage, which is awesome. However, this Ampharos does come with this new Flaffy with the Disconnect attack, where it does 40 damage for 2, and it item locks your opponent. And if we combine the Ampharos with this Flaffy and use Memory Capsule or Shrine of Memories, we could boost this attack and do 120 damage while item locking your opponent, which is very, very strong and could be a cool deck going forward. But that's it for Lightning. Moving on to Psychic, the purple cards. We have a ton of new Deoxys. We'll go through them, ranking them worst to best. The first one being the normal Deoxys, which can accelerate energy from the deck, and then has an attack Psychic for 3 energy, does 80 damage, and 20 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. Most of the time, this is doing 120 to 140 damage, which is like okay sometimes, but there are just like a million other Psychic attackers you would rather be using, or other Deoxys for that matter. So I don't think this guy will see any play. We then have the Defense Deoxys, which for 3 energy does 80, and then you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by opponents' Pokemon that have an ability, and this could be really good into some decks like Fighting, which have almost every attacker has an ability in this deck right now, especially the Okidogi. But then in the mirror, it could also be interesting. It shuts down things like Giratina, but it is conditional. 80 is a little weak and 3 is expensive, but it is interesting. Next we have the Speed Deoxys, which has an attack Psy Speed, which does 30 damage for 1 energy, and you draw cards until you have 5 in your hand. This guy also has free retreat, which is cool, and resist fighting, which is huge. So this is basically Jubilife Village on an attack while you're doing a little damage and then refilling your hand, which is nice. We do have Cleffa, which can do this for free, and you drop to 7, but Cleffa is very easy to knock out, and this could stick around for an extra turn or so. So it is a consideration, but we do have the attacking Deoxys, which I think is the best card out of the set potentially, as it does 120 damage for 3 psychic energy, but if it has at least 2 extra energy attached to it, it does 120 damage to one of the opponent's bench Pokemon. And if this sounds familiar, it is like Raikou, the infamous Raikou. And we can, exploit this with the Psychic Mirage Gardevoir to double all basic psychic energy. If you don't want to play that Gardevoir, we could, play things like double turbo and counter energy, which are conditional / do less damage, but it is still an option. And then we can even cycle this guy with Malamar and Xatu, just reattaching to it. So you only need 3 energy attached to it with the Gardevoir, and I think this could be a very strong archetype, and you can get a ton of double knockouts. Plus you still have Natu with Blindside, so crazy. We then have Xerneas, which I actually think is a great card for that archetype I was just talking about, with the Geostorm attack, which for 3 psychic, it does 30 damage times the number of psychic energy attached to all your Pokemon. So with the Psychic Mirage, this you only need 2 energy on this guy, which is cool. And then just for 2 energy with that, you're doing 120 damage. But if you have just 1 more energy attached to another guy, then the number increases substantially to 180. So very good attacker. Has a weakness to metal instead of dark, which is interesting if you want a different weakness. But yeah, in the Psychic Mirage archetype, I think this guy is great. We have a new Trevenant card, which has 2 interesting attacks. We have Cursed Roots, 30 for 1, and during your opponent's next turn, energy can't be attached to your opponent's defending Pokemon from the hand, which is interesting to kind of stall your opponent if needed early game. But then it has a second attack, Overflowing Pain, which does 60 for 2, but then it does 10 more damage for each damage counter on all of your opponent's Pokemon. And you could go in even just 1 time with the Uxie card, which puts 2 damage counters on all your opponent's Pokemon. And this attack is all of a sudden doing a lot of damage. So it's interesting. Probably won't see play, but it's a cool card. Moving on to fighting, we have this Claydol, which has Devolution Ray, 50 damage for 1 fighting. And if your opponent's active Pokemon is an evolved Pokemon, you devolve it by putting the highest stage evolution into your opponent's hand. So you could play this in a spread deck, like with Palossand and Ting-Lu, which spread a bunch of damage, and then go in with the Claydol to take some cheeky KOs. But not the best strategy. You'd probably just want to attack with things like Okidogi, which is knocking stuff out anyway and is gigantic, but is an interesting card. We do have this Zubat, which is potentially the most optimal Zubat probably. It has 40 HP and free retreat, and it can confuse your opponent, which can buy you a turn sometimes. So I just wanted to point him out. But we do have this new Crobat, which is a stage 2, has the ability Nighttime Maneuvers, which has the ability once during your turn, if this is in the active spot, you may use this ability, search your deck for a card, and shuffle your deck and put that card on top. So the cons is this is a stage 2 and it has to be in the active, but you can slap a U-turn board on this guy and you can use it, a few times out of the game. And it obviously pairs really well with the Liepard, where you can just draw into whatever you need immediately, or this guy could be great in Grimsley's move decks, where you can just stack something like the T-Tar on top of your deck, and then Grimsley's move, and get the Tyranitar out, and go crazy with this guy. So it is a great consistency piece in Dark. I think you either play this or the Draw 3 Crobat. I see arguments for both, and then its attack is like, okay. You do 80 for 1, and your opponent's Pokemon is confused and poisoned. So, good card for Dark, for sure. We do have this Quillfish, which has the ability Poison Point. If it's in the active spot and takes damage from your opponent's Pokemon, the attacking Pokemon is now poisoned. And then has a attack Venoshock, does 30 damage for 1. But if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 50 more, so 80 damage, and then, they are taking 10 more from poison, so really 90. So I think this guy is very, very good in a poison style Dark deck. You can pair this thing with things like Brute Bonnet, Garbodor, boost your poison damage with things like Toxicroak, and is kind of just a good low to the ground attacker for your poison deck. Moving on to Metal, we have this new Metagross, which stage 2, 180 HP, has the attack bounce back for 1. Metal does 60, and your opponent switches their active to the benched. And then Metallic Hammer does 150 for 4, but you may discard 3 metal from this Pokemon and have it do 150 more damage. So it does 300 for 4, but very expensive already, and then you have to discard 3. You can obviously pair this with Metang and, Metal Maker to itself, and then evolve into Metagross, but I don't think you want to sacrifice your Metang for this, and you could use things like Zamazenta, which is just doing plenty of damage most of the time anyway. The only time you would want this is for things like the Whale and Okie Dokie maybe, but again, I'd rather just play a Muscle Band on Zamazenta and be fine. So yeah, just I don't think it's good enough to play per se, which is unfortunate. We do have this Ferrothorn, which is a hilarious card. It has the Prank Drop ability. During your opponent's turn, if this card is discarded from your deck by an effect of your opponent's attacks, abilities, items, or supporter cards, your opponent discards the top 8 cards of their deck. So it is kind of a counter to mill decks, which is really funny, like Centiskorch or Wugtrio. Shout out to Tyrell. Which is just funny. You don't really ever see those decks. So this is kind of a dead card most of the time in your deck, but it does have an okay attack where it's special whip, 70 damage for 2, and if it has any special energy attached, then it does 70 more. So 140 for 2 is fine, but it's on a stage 2, only 130 HP. So not the best, but it is a funny card. Okay, we have this new Gudra, which I am a big fan of. New stage 2 with the Slimy Slip ability. When your opponent's active Pokemon retreats, your opponent flips a coin. If tails, that Pokemon does not retreat, and your opponent does not discard any energy for retreating. This ability does not stack, but that doesn't matter. So this can kind of just stop your opponent from retreating, right? And a lot of decks rely on a pivot card in between knockouts and stuff like that. Things like Psychic really want to have a pivot so that they can use their abilities to accelerate energy. Things like Water, like Lightning, if you're playing against that, all really rely on pivots. So this guy could just stop them from retreating and make your opponent make a difficult decision. Do I promote my pivot and risk it, or do I try and figure out something else? But then it also has a good attack, Dragon Pulse, 160 for 2, and you discard the top card of your deck. We've seen this attack a million times, but it does its job just fine. I think you could pair this Gudra with things like Raging Bolt and Zygarde, where you just stick something in the active and then you snipe around it, which could be kind of funny. I'm calling this deck Escargot. I am coining it. There you go. Escargot deck. Pretty cool. We have this Pat Rat, I want to point out, which has the Watchful Eye, which is an ability. If this Pokemon is in play, you and your opponent can't move damage counters to another Pokemon. So it is a direct counter to Monkey Dory for your colorless decks, which is just hilarious. But if you're not playing things like Monkey Dory, then this is just a dead card. Just wanted to point it out. It does come with this Watchog, which is kind of funny. Has the unannounced check attack. You flip 3 coins. If any are heads, you look at your opponent's hand and choose as many cards as the number of heads, and your opponent shuffles those cards into their deck. This could be pretty good in a colorless control deck, maybe. But is a little silly. I don't know, you probably just want to be playing other cards, but is a mean attack. Moving on into the items, first we have this special red card. You can only play this if your opponent has 3 or less prize card remaining, and your opponent shuffles their hand and puts it at the bottom of their deck, and they draw 3 cards. So we already have a couple disruption cards like this with the regular red card and things like Reset Stamp, which are not conditional. Special red card could probably be better sometimes than normal red card. I think Reset Stamp overall is just like the best card for this. But it's still pretty dang good for disruption. If you need an item to disrupt your opponent's hand, you could play all 3 if you really wanted to and go crazy. Okay, we have Big Catch Net. You shuffle is an item card. You shuffle up to 3 water Pokemon and up to 3 basic water energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. And this is essentially a Brock's Grit on an item card instead of a supporter. You don't get quite as much flexibility because it has to be 3 and 3. You can't mix and match that way. Or it's just like a double Super Rod, which is just insane. This card is nuts. I think this card is going in every single water deck. It is very, very good. It allows you to be a little bit more greedy with recovery cards and fit other things. Yeah, just a very, very good card for water. Then we have Felipe, yep, that's the one, which is Blacksmith for metal. You attach up to 2 basic metal energy from your discard to one of your metal Pokemon. A lot of good metal Pokemon attackers have an expensive cost, and using this guy to kind of get back into the game immediately is very, very good. I think this guy's great. He probably goes in every single metal deck, probably. Synergizes well, actually, with the Revavroom, because you can just, like, discard metal with its ability and draw a bunch of cards, and then you get to play this, which is great. We have Roxy's Performance, which is a supporter during your opponent's next turn. Their poison Pokemon can't retreat. I guess you could pair this with Galarian Weezing, which, you know, poisons, it turns off their abilities, and just stalls for another turn. But this is, like, absurdly expensive for a supporter. I just don't think you should play this. You should play other cards, other supporters, like draw supporters instead. So yeah, we have Emma, which your opponent reveals their hand and you draw cards equal to the number of Pokemon in their hand. This is so bad. Like, at max you're like maybe getting 3 cards. At that point, you'd rather just play like a hop, and then sometimes it's getting like 2, 1, and, you know, most of the time 0 cards off of your supporter. It just does nothing. So this card is just so bad. Don't play this card. We do have this Prism Tower Stadium, which once during each player's turn, they can discard 2 cards from their hand. If they do, draw a card. So I do see some use for this. Sometimes in decks that have draw on Pokemon, your hand can kind of get clogged up. With this, you can kind of discard to just like dig a little deeper with things like Abyssal Hand or Stoked Straw with Beautifly. To just, yeah, it digs a little deeper. It does have its uses, but most of the time I think there are just better stadiums to have in play. There you go. That's it for trainers. We're going to look at energy cards now. First is the Nitro Fire Energy, which, if it's attached to a fire Pokemon, then if it would be, let's see, if an attack used by the fire Pokemon this card is attached to would discard this card, put it into your hand after applying damage and effects of that attack. So you kind of get to preserve your energy, but I think that burning energy that already exists is just like way better because it just reattaches to the Pokemon. I guess this is good if you know your Pokemon is going to be knocked out next turn. But this could be really good on like Blaziken, where you could have both of these on Blaziken and one goes back to him and then this goes back to hand and you have the guaranteed attachment for the next turn. He's kind of the only guy I can think of that this is really good. So yeah, just an average energy. It's not terrible, but it's also like not great. It's not the psychic special energy, you know. Next we have Bubble Water Energy. which the water Pokemon this card is attached to recovers from all special conditions and can't be affected by any special conditions. I guess you can play this as a tech to like poison decks, burn decks, or even the Terraplume decks, which play Venomoth, which is great at confusing people. So you could use this to not be confused, but overall, most of the time, I think you would just rather play a basic water energy because it's just better in most cases, because it's easier to recover and accelerate and all that stuff. And then we have Magnet Metal Energy last, which the metal Pokemon this card is attached to has no retreat cost, which is a cool card. I think it's fine. I think probably the best place for this is actually on Zamazenta, because a lot of the times you go in with a Retaliate, but then your opponent doesn't do anything the next turn, and then Zamazenta is kind of stuck not doing enough damage with Retaliate anymore. So with this, you can just retreat Zamazenta and preserve all of its energy and go in with a different Pokemon, different attacker. So or if you really need to, you can slap this on one of your fat metal support Pokemon to get out of the active. So this is a fine energy, but it also takes up a place for a basic energy, which, you know, makes Metal Maker a little worse. But yeah, pros and cons. And that's going to do it. We'll go to my current tier list, which has not really changed at all. I do think this is probably the order of types. Psychic being still the best, even after the D Valley ban. I still think it's the best. Followed by Fighting, and then Water. In A tier, I do think that Grass is the best in tier, followed by Dragon and Colorless. Then in B tier, I do have Metal here. I could see Metal becoming A with the rise of Arch Nemesis, if you've seen that deck. For now, I do have it in B. I think it just falls short to the above types. So, and then Dark and Lightning still in B. Dark is still on the rise. I hope it keeps rising. Dark is cool. We need more Dark to take care of Psychic. But then in C, we still have Fire, and D with Fairy, of course. So that's all I have for today. If there's a card I missed, please let me know in the comments that I missed it, and I can tell your thoughts. If you disagree with any of these takes, you can also let me know that as well. Yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.